The CH-47 Chinook descended through a veil of copper-colored dust, its twin rotors kicking up a storm that forced every soldier on the landing zone to shield their eyes. Forward Operating Base Sentinel sat like a wound carved into the Afghan mountainside, surrounded by HESCO barriers and razor wire that gleamed dull silver in the dying light. The Kinner province stretched beyond in every direction, jagged ridgelines, shadowed valleys, and somewhere out there in the darkness, enemies watching. When Staff Sergeant Maya Chen stepped off the rear ramp, she didn't walk like the other replacements. She moved like a predator entering unfamiliar territory, her head on a constant swivel, eyes scanning rooftops and ridgelines before she'd taken 3 steps. But what made every soldier on that LZ stop and stare wasn't her movements. It was a rifle. She carried her M110 sniper rifle pressed against her chest like a mother clutching an infant, not slung across her back, not handed off to a supply sergeant, pressed against her body armor. The custom-built stock with its strange engravings visible even through the dust. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez was the first to approach her, clipboard in hand, sweat staining the collar of his ACUs. Staff Sergeant Chen, I'm Rodriguez, Senior NCO for... He stopped when he saw her eyes. They were dark brown, almost black, and they weren't looking at him. They were looking through him, past him, to the northern ridgeline 800 meters away. That ridge, Maya said. Her voice was flat, clinical. What's the observation schedule? Rodriguez blinked. Excuse me? The northern ridgeline, elevation approximately 900 meters above our position. Natural defilade from mortar teams. Perfect line of sight to the motor pool and command post. She finally met his eyes, and Rodriguez felt something cold settle in his stomach. What's the observation schedule? We have standard guard rotations. Every 4 hours. Every 4 hours. Maya's jaw tightened. She looked back at the ridgeline. Every 4 hours, someone glances at it between scanning their assigned sector. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories of courage under fire, and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to where Maya Chen's nightmare really began, 2 years before she ever set foot on FOB Sentinel. Rodriguez opened his mouth to respond, but Maya was already walking toward the operations center, her rifle still clutched to her chest. She didn't look back. She didn't ask for directions. She simply moved with the certainty of someone who had studied satellite imagery until she could navigate this base blindfolded. Behind her, Rodriguez exchanged glances with Corporal Peters, who had been unloading supply crates from the Chinook. Peters made the universal gesture for crazy by twirling his finger near his temple. Neither of them knew that Staff Sergeant Maya Chen had 128 confirmed kills. Neither of them knew about the Silver Star citation locked in her personnel file. And neither of them knew about Forward Operating Base Kadir. 2 years earlier, in the Helmand province, a 27-year-old Maya Chen had been a rising star of the 2nd Battalion Sniper Section. She was methodical, patient, and possessed a kind of preternatural calm under fire that instructors at Fort Benning whispered about to their advanced students. Her spotter, Sergeant James Rivera, called her Ghost because of her ability to disappear into any position and remain motionless for hours. They had served 3 deployments together. James had been at her wedding to David, a Marine Corps captain she'd met during joint training exercises. James had held her when she received a Red Cross message that David had been killed by an IED outside Fallujah, just 7 months into their marriage. And James had been the one who convinced her not to leave the army, not to surrender to the grief that had threatened to swallow her whole. You're the best I've ever seen, James had told her during a midnight conversation on the roof of their barracks. And out here, being the best means keeping people alive. You owe it to them. You owe it to David. So Maya had stayed. She'd channeled her grief into obsessive preparation, spending hours studying terrain maps, memorizing enemy movement patterns, cataloging every possible avenue approach to whatever position she occupied. She became known for her threat assessments, detailed documents she would submit to her commanding officers outlining potential vulnerabilities in their defensive positions. Most commanders appreciated her thoroughness. Some found it excessive. Captain Warren at FOB Kadir had found it insufferable. FOB Kadir was a small outpost in a valley that Maya had hated from the moment she'd seen it. The terrain was wrong. Too many dead zones, too many blind spots, and a series of abandoned compounds to the east that provided perfect cover for enemy approach. On her third day there, she'd submitted a 12-page threat assessment to Captain Warren, highlighting 17 separate vulnerabilities. Captain Warren had glanced at the first page, set it down, and told her that her job was to shoot, not think. On the night of October 14th, 2009, Maya couldn't sleep. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the way the dogs in the nearby village had stopped barking. She could see it in the patterns she'd observed over the past week. The unusual vehicle movements, the absence of civilians in the eastern compounds during daylight hours, the systematic way someone had been mapping their guard rotations. She went to Captain Warren's quarters at 0200 and requested permission to establish an overwatch position on the eastern perimeter. "It's 2 a.m, Sergeant," Warren had said, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. "Get some rack time." "That's an order." Maya had returned to the female berthing area. Per regulations, she'd secured her M110 in the armory before going to her bunk. She'd lain there in the darkness, her heart pounding, every instinct screaming that death was coming. At 0347, the first 82mm mortar round struck the communications building. The attack on FOB Kadir lasted 47 minutes. In military terms, it was a textbook combined arms assault, mortar fire to suppress and disorient, followed by infantry assault from multiple directions. The eastern compounds that Maya had identified as threats disgorged over 60 Taliban fighters who had infiltrated during the preceding weeks. Maya had been in her underwear and a t-shirt when the first explosion threw her from her bunk. She'd scrambled through smoke and screaming, through the chaos of soldiers who'd been jolted from sleep into combat, through the corridors that had become death traps as RPG rounds punched through the walls. By the time she'd reached the armory, it was on fire. She stood there in the flickering orange light, watching her rifle, her tool, her purpose, her means of protecting everyone around her, become engulfed in flames that she couldn't reach through. Around her, the base was dying. She could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s, the heavier thump of PK machine guns, and underneath it all, the screams. James Rivera found her there, frozen in front of the burning armory. He was already wounded, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, but he'd managed to grab 2 M4 carbines from a fallen soldier. He shoved one into her hands. Maya, we have to move." She moved. They both moved. For the next 33 minutes, they fought a desperate holding action near the eastern wall, trying to plug a gap that had been blown open by a vehicle-borne IED. Maya fired her M4 until the barrel was too hot to touch, then picked up another from a dead private whose name she would later learn was Kowalski. She fired that one until the ammunition ran dry. James was everywhere, directing fire, pulling wounded soldiers to cover, calling out enemy positions with a voice that never wavered. He was a calm in the center of the storm, and Maya clung to that calm like a lifeline. At 0419, a Taliban fighter with an RPG, 7 stepped around a corner 30 meters from their position. Maya saw him first. She raised her M4, pulled the trigger, and heard the empty click of a dry magazine. Time stopped. She watched James turn toward the threat. She watched him raise his own rifle. She watched the RPG ignite in a plume of smoke and fire. The rocket struck the wall 2 meters from James Rivera, and the blast threw Maya backward into darkness. When she woke up, the sun was rising and American helicopters were circling overhead. Quick reaction forces from Bagram had arrived, driving off the remaining attackers and securing what was left of FOB Kadir. Maya was told later that she'd been unconscious for nearly 2 hours, that she'd suffered a severe concussion and multiple lacerations from shrapnel. None of that mattered. What mattered was that James Rivera was dead. So were Private First Class Kowalski, Specialist Thompson, Sergeant Williams, Corporal Davis, Staff Sergeant Morrison, and Captain Warren himself killed when a command post took a direct mortar hit. 7 soldiers gone. 7 soldiers who might have lived if Maya's threat assessment had been taken seriously. 7 soldiers who might have lived if she'd been in position, if her rifle hadn't been locked away, if she'd pushed harder, argued longer, refused to accept a dismissive order. The investigation that followed was thorough and ultimately inconclusive. Captain Warren was posthumously criticized for inadequate defensive preparations, but Maya was cleared of any wrongdoing. She had followed regulations. She had followed orders. That was a problem. Following regulations had gotten 7 people killed. Following orders had left her standing in front of a burning armory while her friends died around her. The system that was supposed to protect soldiers had failed them, and Maya-chan, methodical, patient, by-the-book Maya-chan, had been complicit in that failure. Something broke inside her that night at FOB Kadir, or perhaps something was forged. Either way, the woman who emerged from that trauma was not the same woman who had entered it. The Army psychologist diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder and recommended medical discharge. Maya refused. She demanded to return to duty, and after 6 months of intensive therapy and evaluation, the Army reluctantly agreed. Her therapist at Walter Reed, a civilian contractor named Dr. Okonkwo, had written in her final assessment that Staff Sergeant Chin exhibited hypervigilance and obsessive preparatory behaviors that, while potentially maladaptive in civilian contexts, may represent a functional adaptation to combat environments. In other words, Maya-chan would never relax again, but she might still be useful in a war zone. What Dr. Okonkwo hadn't written, what Maya had never told anyone, was that she'd made a promise to James Rivera's grave. She'd stood there in Arlington National Cemetery on a cold December morning, her dress uniform crisp and her eyes dry, and she'd promised that she would never again be caught unprepared. She would never again follow an order that put lives at risk. She would never again trust anyone else to see the threats that she could see, and she would never, ever be separated from her weapon. The M110 she carried now was not the same rifle that had burned in the FOB Kadia armory. It was a custom build that she commissioned from a retired Special Forces armorer, paid for with her own money, and assembled to her exact specifications. The stock was engraved with 7 names in tiny letters that she could trace with her finger in the darkness. James, Kowalski, Thompson, Williams, Davis, Morrison, Warren. She slept with that rifle every night. She ate with it within arm's reach. She showered with it propped against the bathroom door. Some soldiers called it crazy. Maya called it never again. Now, as she approached the command post at FOB Sentinel, she was already cataloging vulnerabilities. The HESCO barriers on the northern perimeter were 2 rows deep instead of 3. The guard towers were spaced too far apart, creating blind spots in the wire. The motor pool was positioned in direct line of sight from the ridgeline she'd identified from the helicopter. And the soldiers here, the relaxed postures, the casual conversations, the assumption that the wire would protect them, they reminded her of FOB Kadir. They reminded her of the night before everyone died. Captain Thomas Holloway was 43 years old and on his 4th deployment. He'd survived Fallujah, Ramadi, and Kandahar, and he considered himself an excellent judge of character. Within 30 seconds of meeting Staff Sergeant Maya-chan, he judged her to be a problem. It wasn't the rifle. Combat veterans developed attachments to their weapons, and a sniper's relationship with her rifle was practically sacred. He could excuse the way she kept it close. What he couldn't excuse was the look in her eyes when she walked into his command post. Staff Sergeant Chun, reporting as ordered, sir. At ease. Holloway leaned back in his chair, studying her. She was smaller than he'd expected. Maybe 5'5", lean and wiry in the way of soldiers who burned more calories than they consumed. Her face was weathered beyond her years, the kind of premature aging that came from too much sun, too little sleep, and too many memories. Your reputation precedes you. Yes, sir. 128 confirmed kills. Silver Star with Valor. 3 Bronze Stars. And according to your file, you spent 6 months at Walter Reed being evaluated for... He glanced at the folder on his desk. PTSD? Yes, sir. The evaluators cleared you for duty. Yes, sir. Holloway waited for her to elaborate. She didn't. She simply stood there, her eyes fixed on a point approximately 6 inches above his head, her rifle pressed against her body armor. FOB Sentinel isn't like the bases you've served on before, he said finally. We're not a major hub. We're a monitoring station, an intelligence gathering post. Our job is to watch the valleys, report enemy movement, and occasionally provide sniper support for operations in the area. We haven't had a significant contact in 4 months. For months, sir? That's right. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. With respect, sir, the absence of contact doesn't indicate the absence of threat. It could indicate the presence of planning. Holloway felt his shoulders tense. The Taliban in this region are scattered and disorganized. We've had excellent intelligence. The northern ridgeline, sir. What about it? It provides optimal observation of our motor pool and command post, elevation advantage of approximately 900 meters, natural defilade from mortar positions. Has there been systematic reconnaissance of that ridge? Holloway's eyes narrowed. We have patrol routes that cover the major approaches, but not the ridge itself, not the reverse slope, where mortar teams could preposition and wait. Staff Sergeant. Holloway's voice dropped into the register that had made lieutenants tremble in Fallujah. You've been on this base for approximately 15 minutes. I've been here for 7 months. I think I understand our tactical situation better than you do. Maya met his eyes for the first time. There was no defiance in her gaze, nothing so simple as that. There was something worse. There was certainty. Yes, sir, she said. May I request permission to conduct independent observation of the northern perimeter during my off-duty hours? Holloway wanted to say no. He wanted to establish immediately that Staff Sergeant Chun was subordinate, not an autonomous threat analyst with her own agenda. But the silver star in her file gave him pause. You didn't earn a silver star by being paranoid. Fine, he said, in your off-duty hours. But your primary duty assignment is support for the intelligence section. Sergeant Rodriguez will show you to your quarters. Thank you, sir. Maya executed a perfect about-face and walked toward the door. Chun. She stopped but didn't turn. The rifle. You understand that you'll need to secure in the armory during sleep hours, per regulations? The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. When Maya spoke, her voice was quiet enough that Holloway had to lean forward to hear it. With respect, sir, I was granted a medical waiver for that regulation. It's in my file. She walked out before he could respond. The female berthing area at FOB Sentinel was a small building with 6 bunks, only 2 of which were occupied. Specialist Sarah Kim was a communications technician who had been at Sentinel for 3 months. She was 22, perpetually cheerful, and completely unprepared for the woman who walked through her door that evening. Oh, hi. You must be the new sniper. I'm Kim, but everyone calls me. She stopped when she saw the rifle. Are you at a night shift or something? Maya set her duffel bag on the empty bunk farthest from the door. She swept her eyes across the room. 2 windows, both with adequate fields of fire. Single entrance, defensible but potentially a fatal funnel. Thin walls that would not stop rifle rounds. No, Maya said. I'm going to sleep. With your rifle? Yes. Kim watched as Maya methodically unpacked her belongings. There wasn't much. 3 sets of ADUs, basic toiletries, a battered paperback copy of a book on military history, and a small wooden box that she placed on her nightstand with careful reverence. What's in the box? Kim asked, then immediately winced. Sorry, that's probably personal. Maya didn't answer for a long moment. Then she opened the box and showed Kim what was inside. 7 dog tags, worn and scratched, arranged in a careful row on red velvet. Reminders, Maya said. Kim didn't ask any more questions that night. Over the following days, the soldiers of FOB Sentinel learned to work around Staff Sergeant Chun. She did her job in the intelligence section competently, analyzing terrain imagery and providing input on potential sniper positions for upcoming operations. She answered questions with minimal words and maximum precision. She ate her meals alone, her rifle propped against the table beside her, and every night, without fail, she would walk to the northern perimeter and spend hours staring at the ridgeline through her scope. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez approached Captain Holloway on the 3rd day. Sir, I'm concerned about Chun. Join the club. She's not sleeping, sir. Or barely. Kim says she maybe gets 2 or 3 hours a night, and even then, she sleeps with that rifle like it's a teddy bear. The rest of the time, she's watching that ridge. She's taking photographs. She's making notes. I saw her notebook. She's documenting every vehicle that passes on the road, every person who enters or leaves the village, every guard rotation we run. Holloway sighed. She's a highly decorated combat veteran with documented PTSD who has been cleared for duty by military medical professionals. As long as she does her job and doesn't endanger anyone, I can't exactly order her to relax. And if she's seeing threats that aren't there, then she's wasting her time and losing sleep. That's her prerogative. Rodriguez hesitated. What if she's seeing threats that are there? The question hung in the air between them. Holloway looked out his window toward the northern ridgeline, a dark mass against the star-filled sky. Then I suppose we'll find out, he said. On her 5th day at FOB Sentinel, Maya Chin saw the first confirmed sign. She was in her usual position on the northern perimeter, lying prone on a rooftop that gave her an unobstructed view of the ridgeline at 800 meters. Her M110 was extended before her. Her eye pressed the scope, her breathing steady and slow. Most soldiers would have seen nothing but rocks and shadows. Maya saw the reflection. It was brief, a fraction of a second, but unmistakable. Somewhere on that ridgeline, glass had caught the dying sunlight. Binoculars, a scope, something designed for observation. She photographed the location, noted the time, and added it to her growing file. The next morning, she requested a meeting with Captain Holloway. Sir, I have evidence of enemy observation. Holloway looked up from his paperwork with the expression of a man who had heard this phrase too many times. Evidence. Maya placed a manila folder on his desk. Inside were 17 photographs, a hand-drawn map of the ridgeline with annotated positions, and a 3-page analysis of observed patterns. Over the past 5 days, I've documented 6 separate instances of reflected light from a northern ridge, consistent with optical surveillance equipment. The timing correlates with our guard rotation changes, suggesting the observers are mapping our patrol patterns. Additionally, vehicle traffic on the Eastern Road has decreased by 40% compared to regional averages, which historically indicates civilian awareness of impending conflict. Holloway leafed through the photographs. They were grainy, shot extreme zoom, showing nothing but rocky terrain and shadows. The reflection she'd circled could have been anything: mica and rock, discarded metal, the sun hitting at an odd angle. Staff Sergeant, these photos don't show anything definitive. Sir, enemy surveillance is by definition not definitive until the attack begins. But the pattern could be coincidence. The vehicle traffic could be explained by a dozen factors: weather, tribal disputes, harvest season. Holloway closed the folder. I appreciate your vigilance. I really do, but I can't reallocate resources based on blurry photographs and statistical analysis. Sir, I'm not asking for reallocation. I'm asking for permission to establish a permanent observation post on the northern perimeter. One additional soldier on night watch, focused specifically on that ridge. We don't have the manpower for additional posts. Then let me do it myself. Off duty. I'm already watching that ridge every night. Let me do it officially with communication equipment and authorization to engage if I identify a threat. Holloway studied her face. The woman standing before him was clearly exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, a tremor in her hands that she probably thought she was hiding. She looked like someone who was running on fumes and willpower, sustained by nothing but conviction. She also looked like someone who would not stop. Not ever. Fine, he said. You can establish a temporary observation post during night hours, but you do it on your own time, with your own equipment. And if I hear that you're neglecting your daytime duties and intelligence, I'll revoke the authorization immediately. Understood, sir. Thank you. That night, Maya didn't just observe. She built, using materials scrounged from the base's supply depot, sandbags, camouflage netting, a portable communications radio. She constructed a small fighting position on the northern perimeter. It was basic, barely more than a reinforced hole with overhead cover, but it gave her a stable firing platform and protection from mortar fire. Rodriguez found her there at 0300, filling sandbags by headlamp. Chun, what the hell are you doing? Preparing. For what? There's no intelligence suggesting an attack. We haven't had contact in 4 months. Maya continued filling sandbags. When I was stationed at FOB Qadir, we went 93 days without contact. Then, on day 94, 60 Taliban fighters hit us from the east at 0347. They'd been planning that attack for months. They'd been watching us, just like someone is watching this base from that ridge. Rodriguez looked at the ridge, a black mass against a slightly less black sky. You really believe someone's up there? I know someone's up there. I've seen the reflections. Optical surveillance. They're mapping our guard rotations, identifying our defensive weaknesses, calculating our response times. They're doing exactly what I would do before launching an assault. And if you're wrong, Maya stopped filling sandbags. She stood and looked at Rodriguez with eyes that had seen too much, lost too much, and refused to lose any more. If I'm wrong, I've wasted some sleep and some sandbags. If I'm right, and no one is prepared. She shook her head. Sergeant, I've already lived through that scenario once. I watched 7 people die because I followed regulations instead of my instincts. I'm not going to let that happen again. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then he knelt beside her, grabbed an empty sandbag, and started filling it with dirt. I think you're paranoid, he said, but you're the most decorated sniper I've ever met, and you seem pretty damn sure. So I'll help you build your little bunker. But if you're wrong, you're buying me a case of beer. Maya almost smiled. It was the closest she'd come to that expression in 2 years. Deal. Over following days, Maya's observation post-grew. She reinforced the walls with additional sandbags, created a secondary firing position with clear lines of sight to the motor pool, and pre-positioned ammunition and medical supplies. She mapped engagement ranges to every visible point on the ridgeline, 823 meters to the western outcropping, 847 meters to the cluster of boulders that provided the best mortar cover. She also continued her documentation. Every night, she photographed the ridge at sunset and sunrise. Every night, she recorded the timing and duration of any reflected light. Every night, she updated her analysis. On the 12th day, she saw them. It was 2214 when 4 figures appeared on the ridge, silhouetted briefly against a moonless sky, before dropping into cover. Through her thermal scope, Maya could see their body heat. 4 distinct signatures, moving in a tactical formation that spoke of military training. She reached for her radio. TOC, this is Chun on Northern OP. I have eyes on 4 military-age males on the ridge. Grid reference. Chun, this is TOC. Say again. 4 MAMs, Northern Ridge, conducting what appears to be terrain reconnaissance. Request permission to engage. There's a long pause. Then Captain Holloway's voice came over the radio, tight with irritation. Negative on engagement. At this range, in darkness, with no confirmation of hostile intent, you could be looking at shepherds. Sir, they're moving in tactical formation. Military-age males don't herd sheep at 2,200 hours in combat formations. I said negative. Continue observation and report any hostile action. Maya's finger hovered over the trigger. At 800 meters, with her custom M110 and match-grade ammunition, she could eliminate all 4 targets in under 10 seconds. She could end this reconnaissance mission before it reported back, before the attack was finalized, before the mortars started falling. But she was not at FOB Qadir anymore. She was not a soldier who had forgotten how to follow orders. She was a soldier who had learned that following orders could get people killed. But also a soldier who understood that murdering civilians, even suspected hostiles, was a line she could not cross. Understood, she said. Continuing observation. The figures remain on the ridge for 43 minutes. They appear to be mapping the base layout, pointing toward the motor pool and command post, making notes. Then they withdrew over the reverse slope and disappeared. Maya documented everything. She photographed the position where they'd been. She calculated approach and withdrawal routes. She updated her analysis with a new assessment. Attack imminent. Probable timeline, 72 to 96 hours. Primary threat axis, Northern Ridge. Secondary, unknown. The next morning, she returned to Captain Holloway's command post. Sir, I need to speak with you about the attack. Holloway looked up. His face was already set in the expression of a man who had run out of patience. There is no attack, Staff Sergeant. Sir, I observed 4 enemy combatants conducting reconnaissance on the northern ridge last night. They were mapping our positions. An assault is imminent. I estimate within 72 hours. You observed 4 figures at 800 meters in the dark and assumed they were enemy combatants. You don't know what you saw. Sir, their movement patterns could have been villagers, could have been ANA soldiers from the outpost to the north, could have been 100 different things that aren't Taliban planning an attack on a base that hasn't been hit in 4 months. Maya placed her updated analysis on his desk. Sir, please, just read the assessment. The reflection patterns, the vehicle traffic, the reconnaissance, it all points to an imminent assault. I've seen this before. At FOB Qadir, the patterns were identical. The timing, the observation, the systematic mapping of our defenses. I reported it then, and I was ignored. 7 people died. Holloway stood. He was a full head taller than Maya, and he used every inch of that height as he leaned toward her. Staff Sergeant Chun, I've read your file. All of it. I know what happened at FOB Qadir, and I'm sorry you went through that, but your trauma does not give you authority to override my command decisions. You are not the CO of this base. I am, and I'm telling you that based on current intelligence, there is no credible threat. Current intelligence is wrong. That's not your call to make. Maya stood her ground. Then whose call is it when the mortars start falling, when soldiers are dying, because we weren't prepared? Will you take responsibility for that, sir? The silence stretched between them like razor wire. Get out of my command post. Holloway said quietly, That's an order. Maya collected her analysis and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. 72 hours, sir. Maybe less. When it happens, I'll be on the northern perimeter. I hope someone else will be prepared to fight. She left before he could respond. The next 48 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Maya barely slept, dividing her time between her intelligence duties and her observation post. She prepositioned additional ammunition. 300 rounds for her M110, another 400 for the M240 machine gun that Rodriguez had quietly helped her mount in the secondary fighting position. Rodriguez had also started talking to the other soldiers. Quietly, without making it official, he'd suggested that certain individuals might want to sleep with their weapons nearby, that it might be worth knowing the location of the nearest fighting position, that it couldn't hurt to be ready, just in case. Most of them laughed it off. A few listened. On the evening of the 47th hour since Maya had made her prediction, she returned to the northern perimeter as the sun dipped below the western mountains. The sky was deep purple, fading to black, and the moon was nowhere to be seen. New moon, Maya thought. Optimal conditions for an assault. She settled into her position, her M110 extended before her thermal scope humming with electronic warmth. The ridge was quiet. The base was quiet. The whole valley seemed to be holding its breath. At 2100, Specialist Kim arrived at her position with a thermos of coffee and a nervous expression. Rodriguez said you might want this. Maya accepted the thermos without taking her eye from the scope. Thank him for me. Kim lingered. Staff Sergeant, is it true what you've been telling people? That someone's coming. Yes. How can you be sure? Maya was quiet for a moment, adjusting her position to relieve the pressure on her elbows. When you spend enough time watching, you learn to see patterns. The enemy has patterns, just like we do. They prepare before they attack. They gather intelligence. They position their assets. And they always underestimate how much we're capable of seeing. But Captain Holloway is a good officer who's been in theater for 7 months without significant contact. That kind of quiet can make you complacent. It makes you believe that the absence of violence means the absence of threat. Maya glanced at Kim for the first time. Do you trust me? Kim hesitated. I don't know you. Fair. Then trust my record. 128 kills. 3 deployments. Silver Star. I didn't earn those by being paranoid. I earned them by being right. Maya turned back to her scope. Go back to the berthing area. If something happens, you'll hear it. When you do, don't freeze. Get to a fighting position and stay low until you know what's happening. Kim nodded, then retreated into the darkness. Maya was alone again. The hours crawled past. 2200, 2300, 0000. The thermal scope showed nothing but the ambient heat of rocks cooling after sunset. The ridge was empty. The valley was silent. At 0047, Maya's radio crackled. Northern Opie. This is Tilsi. Status report. Tilsi, Northern Opie. All quiet. No activity observed. Copy. You're cleared to return to quarters if desired. Night rotation is in position at the guard towers. Maya looked at the darkness where the ridge should be. Every instinct in her body was screaming that something was wrong, that the quiet was too perfect, that the absence of activity was itself a kind of activity. Negative, TOC. I'm staying on station. Your call. TOC out. Maya settled deeper into her position. She ran her fingers over the engraved names on her rifle stock. James, Kowalski, Thompson, Williams, Davis, Morrison, Warren. I see them, she whispered into the darkness. I know they're there, and I'm not leaving. At 0217, she saw the first flash. It came from a ridge, a brief flare of light that her thermal scope identified as a heat signature. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ridgeline was alive with activity as more than a dozen figures emerged from covered positions and began setting up equipment. Mortar tubes. Maya's hands moved before her conscious mind could process what was happening. She keyed her radio. TOC, this is Northern Opie. Contact. I have visual on multiple enemy combatants establishing mortar positions on the northern ridge. Grid reference. The first 82 millimeters round left its tube with a distinctive thump that echoed across the valley. 3 seconds later, it struck the mortar pool with an explosion that shattered the night. All hell broke loose. The mortar barrage was precise and devastating, the product of weeks of careful reconnaissance. The first 3 rounds hit the motor pool, destroying 2 Humvees and igniting a fuel bladder that sent flames roaring into the sky. The next 2 struck near the command post, collapsing a section of the HESCO wall and filling the air with concrete dust and screaming. Maya didn't wait for orders. She swung her scope to the ridgeline, found the nearest mortar team, and squeezed her trigger. The first Taliban fighter dropped before he knew he was being targeted. Maya worked the bolt, acquired the second member of the team, and fired again. 2 down. She shifted to the next position, 831 meters, and dropped 2 more. Behind her, the base was chaos. Soldiers were pouring out of the barracks, some fully equipped, most half-dressed and confused. The guard towers were returning fire, but shooting blind, their rounds sparking off rocks hundreds of meters from any actual enemy position. Maya ignored all of it. She had a job to do. 823 meters. 2 more down. 847 meters. Another team eliminated. She was firing at a rate that would have been impossible for most soldiers. 1 round every 4 to 5 seconds, each one finding its target with mechanical precision. Her breathing was steady. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled. She was in the zone, that state of hyper-focused calm that separated good snipers from legends. But there were too many of them. Even as she dropped mortar teams, more appeared on the ridge. And worse. She began to hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s from the base's eastern perimeter. They weren't just mortaring the base. They were assaulting it. Maya grabbed her radio. TOC, this is Northern Opie. I have suppressed multiple mortar teams on the northern ridge, but they are still operational. Additionally, I'm hearing small arms fire from the east. Probable ground assault in progress. No response. Either the TOC had been hit or the communications were jammed. She was on her own. Maya made a decision that would later be described in after-action reports as tactically unorthodox but operationally effective. She abandoned her sniper position and moved to the secondary fighting position where the M240 machine gun was mounted. With the mortar teams continuing to fire and enemy infantry approaching from the east, precision shooting was no longer sufficient. She needed volume. The M240 roared to life in her hands, sending a stream of 7.62 millimeters rounds toward the ridgeline. She couldn't see individual targets anymore. The dust and smoke from the mortar impact had obscured her thermal view, but she could see the muzzle flashes of the mortar tubes, and she walked her fire toward them with methodical precision. Return fire began to snap around her position. The Taliban had identified her location, and now they were trying to kill her. Rounds cracked past her head, thudded into sandbags, ricocheted off the concrete barriers she'd reinforced over the past 2 weeks. Maya didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her position to present a smaller target and continued firing. At 0231, she heard someone approaching from behind and nearly spun around to engage before recognizing Rodriguez's voice. Chun, I'm friendly. Rodriguez slid into position beside her, breathing hard. He was wearing body armor over civilian clothes, and his hands were shaking slightly as he grabbed an ammunition box for the M240. Tilsey's been hit, he gasped. Captain Holloway's wounded. Eastern perimeter is being overrun. They came out of the abandoned compounds. Just like you said, there must be 50 of them. Then why are you here? The East needs. The East is chaos. Half the soldiers there don't know what's happening. But you? Rodriguez looked at her with something approaching awe. You're the only one who is ready. You're the only one with a fortified position. And the way you're shooting. You're the only chance we have of suppressing those mortars long enough for QRF to arrive. Maya absorbed this information in a fraction of a second. How long until QRF? Bagram is scrambling. 2 hours, maybe more. 2 hours. In 2 hours, every soldier on this base could be dead. Then we hold. Maya said, get on that radio and tell everyone you can reach that the northern perimeter is secure. Tell them to fall back toward this position if they're overrun. I'll keep the mortar suppressed. You feed me ammunition and watch my flanks. Rodriguez nodded and grabbed the radio. Maya turned back to the ridgeline and continued firing. The battle for FOB Sentinel lasted 4 hours and 13 minutes. In that time, Staff Sergeant Maya Chin fired 340 rounds, 280 from her M240 machine gun and 60 from her M110, when she needed precision shots to eliminate high-value targets. She killed 34 enemy fighters. The attack came in waves. The initial mortar barrage was designed to create chaos and destroy key infrastructure. The motor pool, the communications building, the command post. It succeeded partially. The motor pool was devastated. The comms building took a direct hit that killed 2 soldiers inside, and Captain Holloway suffered shrapnel wounds that left him unable to command. But the follow-on assault from the east encountered stiffer resistance than the Taliban had anticipated. Rodriguez's quiet warnings had reached some of the soldiers, and those who were prepared rallied the others. The eastern perimeter held, barely, as soldiers fought from improvised positions, using whatever cover they could find. The turning point came at 0312. Maya had been firing for nearly an hour, her shoulders burning from the M240's recoil, her throat raw from inhaling smoke and concrete dust. She was down to her last box of machine gun ammunition when she saw something that made her blood run cold. Movement on the northern slope. Not on the ridge, on the slope itself, approaching the perimeter. The mortar barrage had been a diversion. While the base focused its attention on the eastern assault and Maya focused on suppressing the mortar teams, a flanking element had descended from the ridge and was now within 400 meters of the northern wire. She counted them through her thermal scope. 12, 15, 20 fighters, moving in tactical formation, carrying RPGs and automatic weapons. They were headed directly for the gap in the HESCO barriers that the mortar barrage had created. If they breached the northern perimeter, they would hit the base from behind. The soldiers fighting on the eastern side would be caught in a crossfire. It would be a massacre. Maya grabbed her M110 and keyed the radio. All stations, this is Northern OP. I have 20-plus enemy fighters approaching the northern perimeter, approximately 400 meters and closing. They're trying to flank us. I need immediate support at my position. Static. Either no one could hear her or no one could respond. She was alone. Maya settled behind her rifle and began to shoot at 400 meters with moving targets in low light. Even the best sniper in the world would struggle to maintain a high hit rate. Maya achieved 73%. She fired, worked the bolt, acquired the next target, fired again. Each round that found its mark was another fighter who would never threaten her soldiers. But 20 fighters at 400 meters, even losing soldiers to precision fire, could still reach the wire in under 2 minutes. And Maya couldn't shoot fast enough to stop them all. She made another decision. The M110 went down. The M240 came back up. She stood, fully exposing herself to enemy fire, and walked the machine gun's tracers across the approaching formation. At that range, with that volume of fire, she was no longer making precision shots. She was creating a wall of bullets that the enemy could not advance through without dying. The M240 roared, spitting brass casings that bounced off the sandbags and rolled across the concrete. Return fire intensified. Maya felt something hot slice across her left arm, a grazing hit that drew blood but didn't penetrate. She ignored it. Another round cracked past her ear, so close that she felt the pressure wave. She ignored that too. All that mattered was the trigger, the target, the belt of ammunition feeding into the gun. The flanking element broke. Survivors turned and fled back toward the ridgeline, dragging wounded comrades with them. Maya followed them with fire until they disappeared over crest. Then she slumped down behind the sandbags, her hands shaking uncontrollably, and realized she was crying. Rodriguez was at her side immediately. Chun, are you hit? I'm fine. She wiped her face with a bloody hand. When had she started bleeding from her hands? And forced herself to breathe. How's the east? Holding. Barely. The enemy's momentum is broken. They're taking too many casualties, and their mortars stopped after you suppress the teams. I think they're pulling back. They're not pulling back. They're regrouping. Check your ammunition. I'm almost out. Maya looked at her own supplies. 1 magazine for her M110. No machine gun ammunition. She'd fired everything she had. Then we wait, she said, and we pray. At 0347, exactly 2 hours after the battle began, they heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the rotors of American helicopters. 2 H-64 Apache gunships screamed over the base at 200 feet, their chain guns already spinning as they searched for targets. Behind them, a pair of CH-47s carrying the quick reaction force from Bagram was preparing to land. The Taliban broke. Those who could run fled into the mountains. Those who couldn't run died under Apache fire. Within 15 minutes, the ridgeline that had launched an attack on FOB Sentinel was silent. Maya sat in her fighting position as the sun began to rise over the eastern mountains. She was covered in dust, blood, and gun oil. Her left arm was wrapped in a pressure bandage that Rodriguez had applied at some point during the battle. Her throat was so raw she could barely speak. But she was alive, and so were the soldiers she had protected. Captain Holloway found her there an hour after the QRF arrived. He was on a stretcher, being loaded onto a medevac helicopter, and he demanded that the medics carry him past the northern perimeter first. Chun. She looked at him but didn't stand. She wasn't sure her legs would hold her. I owe you an apology, Holloway said. His voice was weak, strained by blood loss and pain medication. You saw what I couldn't see. You prepared when I told you not to. And when the attack came, you held this position alone against overwhelming odds. I wasn't alone, sir. Rodriguez was with me for most of it. Rodriguez told me what you did. 340 rounds. 34 confirmed kills. Single-handedly suppressed the mortar teams and stopped the flanking assault. Holloway coughed, wincing as the movement jarred his wounds. I should have listened to you. Maya was quiet for a long moment. She looked out at the ridgeline, now crawling with American soldiers, sweeping for survivors, and collecting intelligence. 7 people died at FOB Qadir because I was heard but not believed, she said finally. I spent 2 years thinking that if I just pushed harder, argued louder, refused to accept my orders, maybe they would still be alive. This time I pushed, I argued, and people still didn't believe me. She met Holloway's eyes. But this time, I was ready anyway, and that's what saved us. Holloway nodded slowly. The Chun Protocol. Sir, that's what Rodriguez is calling it. The idea that when a soldier with your experience sees a threat, we should listen. That we should never dismiss someone's concerns just because we haven't seen the threat ourselves. He reached out and gripped her uninjured hand. I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Service Cross, and I'm going to make sure that every soldier who serves under me hears your name and knows your story." Maya looked at his hand on hers. She thought of James Rivera, who had believed in her when no one else had. She thought of the 7 names engraved on her rifle stock. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly, "but I didn't do it for medals. I did it because I promised someone that I would never let it happen again." Holloway was loaded onto the helicopter. Maya watched it lift off, carrying him toward Bagram in surgical care, and then she was alone again. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the wooden box that she carried everywhere. 7 dog tags on red velvet. She ran her fingers over them, feeling the raised letters of each name. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I kept my promise, James." For the first time in 2 years, she felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. The aftermath of the Battle of FOB Sentinel unfolded over the following weeks with the grinding bureaucratic machinery that characterized all military operations. Investigation teams arrived from Kabul and Bagram, conducting interviews, collecting evidence, reconstructing the timeline of events with forensic precision. The numbers told a story of overwhelming success against impossible odds. 53 enemy fighters confirmed killed, 3 American soldiers wounded, including Captain Holloway. 0 American fatalities. In a war where small outposts were routinely overrun with devastating casualties, FOB Sentinel survival was nothing short of miraculous. And every investigation, every interview, every piece of evidence pointed to a single explanation: Staff Sergeant Maya Chun. But the investigations also raised uncomfortable questions. Why had Maya's threat assessment been dismissed? Why had her observations of enemy reconnaissance been ignored? Why had a highly decorated sniper with a proven combat record been treated as a paranoid nuisance rather than a valuable intelligence asset? Colonel James Morrison, no relation to the Sergeant Morrison who had died at FOB Kadir, flew in from Kabul to conduct a personal review of the incident. He was a tall, graying officer with the quiet authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in combat and buried too many of them afterward. He found Maya in her observation post, where she had returned the morning after the battle despite her wounds and exhaustion. She was photographing the ridgeline, documenting the positions the Taliban had occupied, analyzing how they had approached without detection. Staff Sergeant Chun. She lowered her camera but didn't stand. "Colonel, you should be in medical. That arm needs proper treatment. It's a graze. The medics cleaned and bandaged it. I'll survive." Morrison sat down on a sandbag beside her, looking out at the ridge where so many had died. "I've read the after-action reports. 340 rounds. 34 confirmed kills. You held this position for over an hour against superior numbers with no support and no authorization to engage until the mortars started falling." "I had authorization, sir. Captain Holloway gave me permission to establish this observation post. He gave you permission to observe, not to stockpile ammunition, construct fortified fighting positions, and mount a crew-served weapon that you were not qualified to operate." Maya was quiet for a long moment. "With respect, sir, am I being disciplined?" Morrison laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Disciplined? Staff Sergeant, I'm here to recommend you for the Distinguished Service Cross and to implement your protocols across every FOB in the region. You're not being disciplined. You're being studied." He pulled out a notebook and a pen. "Tell me about FOB Kadir." Maya froze. The request was simple, direct, and it reached into the darkest part of her memory. She had told the story before, to therapists, to review boards, to herself in the endless hours of night. But each telling ripped open wounds that never fully healed. "I don't know what you want to hear, sir. I want to hear the truth. Your truth, what happened there, and how it made you into the soldier you are now." Maya was silent for so long that Morrison thought she might not answer. Then she began to speak, her voice flat and controlled. "FOB Kadir was a bad position. I knew it was bad from the first day I arrived. Too many blind spots, too many approach routes we couldn't cover, too many positions where the enemy could gather without observation. I submitted a threat assessment to Captain Warren. He ignored it. Did you push back?" "I tried. I requested a meeting. He told me my job was to shoot, not think. I was a staff sergeant and he was a captain. The chain of command exists for a reason. So I accepted his decision and tried to believe that he knew something I didn't. And the night of the attack, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. The dogs weren't barking. The civilians had disappeared from the compounds. I went to Captain Warren at 0200 and requested permission to establish an overwatch position. He ordered me to get some rack time. Maya's hands had begun to shake. She pressed them against her thighs to still them. I went to my bunk. I secured my weapon in the armory, per regulations. I lay there in the dark for almost 2 hours, knowing that something was coming, unable to do anything about it. And then the mortars started falling. And your weapon was in the armory. My weapon was in the armory, on fire. I couldn't reach it. By the time I found another weapon, the attack was fully underway. I fought with an M4 carbine for the next hour, but an M4 at 200 meters in the dark isn't the same as my rifle at 600. I couldn't do what I was trained to do. I couldn't. Her voice broke. She took a shuddering breath and forced herself to continue. 7 people died. James Rivera, Kowalski, Thompson, Williams, Davis, Morrison, Warren himself. 7 people who might have lived if I'd been in position, if I'd pushed harder, if I'd refused to follow orders that I knew were wrong. Morrison was quiet for a moment. So at FOB Sentinel, you did push harder. You refused to accept dismissal. And when your warnings were ignored, you prepared anyway. Yes, sir. That's not strictly by the book, Staff Sergeant. No, sir, it isn't. But it saved lives. Maya looked at the ridge. Dawn was breaking, painting the rocks in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful, in the harsh way that Afghanistan could be beautiful. Yes, sir, it did. Morrison closed his notebook. The Army is a system. Systems need rules. But rules without judgment are just words on paper, and words on paper don't survive contact with the enemy. He stood, brushing dust from his uniform. I'm going to recommend changes to how we handle threat assessments from experienced soldiers. I'm going to recommend that FOB commanders be required to personally review any warnings submitted by decorated combat veterans. And I'm going to recommend that the CHIN protocol be established as standard doctrine for all forward operating bases in Afghanistan. The CHIN protocol, sir. Your approach. Prepositioned ammunition. Fortified observation posts. The assumption that an attack could come at any time, not just when intelligence says it might. Morrison met her eyes. You were right, Staff Sergeant. Everyone else was wrong. And it's the Army's job to learn from that. He started to walk away, then stopped. One more thing. I'm authorizing a 14-day leave. When we're done processing the investigation, you're going home. Get some rest. See your family. Let yourself heal. Maya looked at her rifle, propped against the sandbags beside her. I don't know if I know how to rest anymore, sir. You'll figure it out. That's an order. He walked away, leaving Maya alone with the sunrise and her memories. The investigation concluded after 7 days. Maya was officially cleared of any wrongdoing and commended for actions that had prevented catastrophic loss of life. The CHIN protocol was formally adopted by Regional Command and distributed to every FOB in the area of operations. On the morning of her departure, Maya stood in the female berthing area, packing her duffel bag. Specialist Kim sat on her bunk, watching with an expression that mixed sadness with something like awe. You're really leaving? 14-day leave. Orders from Colonel Morrison. Will you come back? Maya paused, her hand resting on her M110, the rifle that had never left her side for 2 years. The rifle with 7 names carved into its stock. I don't know, she said honestly. This deployment is over for me either way. After leave, I'll probably get reassigned. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere they can keep an eye on the crazy sniper who sleeps with her weapon. You're not crazy. Maya looked at Kim, young, earnest, still innocent in ways that Maya couldn't remember being. I spent 2 weeks telling everyone on this base that an attack was coming, and everyone thought I was paranoid. I slept maybe 2 hours a night. I built a fighting position on my own time with scrounged materials. I hoarded ammunition like a survivalist preparing for the apocalypse. And you were right. This time, Maya zipped her duffel bag. The problem is, I don't know how to turn it off. Even now, even after everything that happened, I'm still looking at that ridgeline. I'm still thinking about the approach routes, the blind spots, the vulnerabilities. I'm still waiting for the next attack. Kim was quiet for a moment. Is that so bad? Being prepared? It is if it never lets you rest. It is if it means you can never be anything but a soldier. Maya shouldered her bag and picked up her rifle. The woman I was before FOB Kadir died that night. The woman I am now, she's useful. She's effective. But she's also exhausted, Kim. So exhausted that she doesn't know how to stop. She walked toward the door, then paused. Thank you for the coffee that night. And for not treating me like I was insane. Kim smiled, though her eyes were wet. Thank you for saving our lives. Maya nodded once and walked out into the Afghan morning. The CH-47 was waiting on the landing pad, rotors already spinning. Rodriguez was there to see her off, along with a small group of soldiers who had survived the battle. They didn't say much. Soldiers rarely did, but each one shook her hand or clapped her shoulder as she passed. She was almost at the helicopter when a voice called out behind her, "Chun, wait." She turned. Captain Holloway was being pushed toward her in a wheelchair, his torso wrapped in bandages, his face pale but determined. Two medics were trying to slow him down, but he waved them off impatiently. Sir, I should be in Bagram. I should be in surgery. I should be anywhere but here. Holloway reached her and looked up from the wheelchair. But I couldn't let you leave without saying something. You already thanked me, sir. I'm not here to thank you again. I'm here to apologize again. He grimaced as he shifted in the chair. I spent 7 months on this base thinking I understood the threat, thinking that because we hadn't been attacked, we weren't going to be attacked. And when you showed up with your rifle and your photographs and your obsessive preparation, I thought you were the problem. I thought your trauma was making you see enemies that weren't there. You weren't entirely wrong, sir. The trauma is real. The hypervigilance is real. I don't know how to be anything but afraid anymore. But you were also right. That's what I keep coming back to. You were seeing clearly while the rest of us were sleepwalking. And that means... He trailed off, searching for words. That means maybe the way we think about trauma is wrong. Maybe soldiers who've seen the worst aren't broken. Maybe they're just awake in a way the rest of us can't understand. Maya considered this. That's a generous interpretation, sir. It's the truth, Chun. At least, it's the truth I'm going to carry with me. When I think about this base and what happened here, I'm not going to remember the attack. I'm going to remember the soldier who saw it coming and prepared anyway, even when no one believed her. He extended his hand. Maya shook it. Go home, Holloway said. Get some rest. And when you're ready to come back, because you will come back, I know you're kind. Find a commander who deserves you. Maya boarded the helicopter without looking back. As the CH-47 lifted off, banking toward Bagram, she watched FOB Sentinel shrink beneath her. The northern perimeter, where she'd fought. The ridgeline, where she'd killed 34 enemy fighters. The observation post, where she'd spent 2 weeks waiting for an attack that everyone said would never come. She wondered if she would ever see it again. She wondered if she would ever stop seeing it. The flight to Bagram took 2 hours. From there, she boarded a C-17 Globemaster that carried her across continents. Afghanistan to Germany, Germany to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. At each stop, military personnel recognized her name and offered salutes, handshakes, expressions of respect that Maya accepted with quiet discomfort. She wasn't used to being celebrated. She was used to being tolerated, accommodated, worked around. The crazy sniper who slept with her rifle. The trauma case who couldn't let go. But now, because she'd been right when everyone else was wrong, they treated her like a hero. It was disorienting. It was uncomfortable. And underneath the disorientation, there was a small, painful ember of something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, being the way she was didn't have to be a curse. Maybe it could be a gift if she could find a way to use it without destroying herself. Maybe she could find peace without losing vigilance. Maybe she could rest without losing readiness. Maybe she could be whole again, even if whole looked different than it had before. Maya's childhood home was a small house in rural Virginia, surrounded by farmland and forest. Her parents had bought it when she was 12, after her father retired from the army himself. 22 years as a supply sergeant, 2 combat deployments, and a collection of war stories he'd told her during long summer evenings on the porch. She arrived at the house on a Thursday afternoon, her duffel bag over her shoulder and her rifle case in her hand. Her mother was waiting on the porch, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, her face weathered by years of worry and pride. Maya, Mom. They embraced. Maya felt her mother's arms tighten around her, felt the tremor in the older woman's body, felt the unspoken fear and relief and love that no words could adequately express. "You're too thin," her mother said finally, pulling back to study her face. "Have you been eating?" "Not enough. Busy saving lives." It was a joke, or an attempt at one, but her mother didn't laugh. She just looked at Maya with eyes that saw too much, that recognized the hollow exhaustion behind the forced lightness. "Come inside. Your father's been cooking all morning." Maya's father was a small man with large hands and a quiet demeanor. He'd been a soldier once, and he understood soldiers in a way that civilians never could. When Maya walked into the kitchen, he didn't rush to embrace her or overwhelm her with questions. He simply looked up from the stove, nodded once, and said, "Beer's in the fridge. Dinner's in an hour." Maya grabbed a beer and went to sit on the back porch. The view hadn't changed since she was a teenager. Rolling fields, distant tree line, the Blue Ridge Mountains on the horizon. It was peaceful in a way that Afghanistan could never be. Safe in a way that no FOB could ever be. She sat there for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky, try to remember what it felt like to relax. Her rifle case sat beside her chair, unopened but within arm's reach. She'd tried to leave it in the house. She'd made it almost to the porch door before turning back to grab it. Old habits, old fears, old wounds that might never heal. Her father joined her as the sun began to set. He brought 2 more beers and sat in the chair next to hers without speaking. They watched the sky turn orange, then pink, then purple. "Your mother showed me the news reports," he said finally. "FOB Sentinel. The attack. Your name." They were exaggerating. They said you held a fortified position against superior numbers for over an hour. They said you killed 34 enemy fighters. They said you predicted the attack when everyone else dismissed you. "I got lucky." Bullshit. Her father's voice was gentle but firm. "I know luck and I know skill. What you did wasn't luck. It was preparation, determination, and the kind of situational awareness that you can't teach. You saw what was coming because you couldn't stop looking for it. And when it came, you were ready." Maya didn't respond. She took a long drink of her beer and watched the first stars appear. "How bad is it?" her father asked. Whatever you want to call it. The hypervigilance. The nightmares. The thing that makes you carry that rifle everywhere. "Bad," Maya admitted. "Better than it was. Worse than it should be." "You sleeping?" "Sometimes. An hour here, 2 hours there. More during the day than at night." "You eating?" "When I remember to." "You talking to anyone? Therapist, chaplain, anyone?" "There was a therapist at Walter Reed, Dr. Okonkwo. She helped some." Her father was quiet for a moment. "You know that what happened to you, what keeps happening to you, it's not weakness. It's not something to be ashamed of." "I know, but knowing isn't the same as feeling it. Isn't the same as believing it." "No," Maya said. "It isn't." They sat in silence until the stars filled the sky. Then her father stood, put his hand on her shoulder, and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of his own memories. "Your mother's grandfather was in the Pacific. Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. He came home with what they called combat fatigue back then. Couldn't sleep without a weapon nearby. Couldn't hear fireworks without ducking for cover. Spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder." That sounds familiar. He lived to be 89 years old, raised 3 children, ran a successful business, watched his grandchildren grow up. He never stopped being alert, never stopped being ready. But he found a way to live with it, found a way to make it work for him instead of against him. Maya looked up at her father. "How?" He accepted it. He stopped trying to be the man he was before the war and accepted the man the war had made him. He built a life around his limitations instead of fighting against them. And slowly, over years, the limitations became smaller. They never went away, but they became manageable. He squeezed her shoulder and walked toward the door. Dinner's ready. Your mother made your favorite. Maya sat alone for another few minutes, thinking about her great-great-grandfather, thinking about the soldiers throughout history who had returned from war transformed by what they'd seen and done, thinking about the long line of wounded warriors who had found ways to carry their wounds without being destroyed by them. She picked up her rifle case and went inside. That night, Maya had a dream. She was back at FOB Kadir in the moments before the attack. The base was quiet. The dogs weren't barking. The eastern compounds were empty. She knew what was coming. She always knew. But this time, something was different. James Rivera was standing beside her. "Hey, Ghost." Maya felt tears streaming down her face. "James, I'm so sorry. I should have—" "Stop." He held up a hand, and his smile was the same warm, steady smile she remembered. "Just stop, Maya. I didn't come here to hear you apologize again. Then why are you here? Because you need to hear something. Something I should have told you before, but I was too busy being your spotter and your best friend and your emotional support human to actually say out loud." He stepped closer, and in the strange logic of dreams, the FOB fell away. They were standing in darkness, just the two of them, and James's face was illuminated by some sourceless light. "You saved us, Maya. Not at FOB Kadir, we both know what happened there, but at FOB Sentinel, and everywhere else you've been, every threat assessment you've written, every position you've fortified, every hour you've spent watching and waiting and preparing. You've saved people. Hundreds of people who will never know your name. But at Kadir, you followed the rules. You trusted the system, and the system failed. That wasn't your fault. It was never your fault." Maya was sobbing now, great racking sobs that shook her entire body. "I should have been there. I should have had my rifle. You should have done exactly what you did. And then when the system failed, you learned from it. You became something different. Something that terrifies the enemy and protects your friends." James reached out and touched her face. His hand was warm, alive. "The woman you were before FOB Kadir did die that night. But the woman you became, the one who can't turn off the vigilance, who sees threats everywhere, who refuses to let her guard down, she's the one who kept 83 soldiers alive at FOB Sentinel. I'm so tired, James. I know, but you can rest now." He smiled again, and this time there was something peaceful in his expression, something that looked like acceptance. "You kept your promise, Maya. You never let it happen again. And now you can let go. I don't know how. You don't have to know how. You just have to try. One day at a time. One night at a time. One deep breath at a time." He stepped back, and the darkness began to lighten. "I have to go, but I'll be watching. I'll always be watching over you, Ghost. James, we can rest now, Maya. Both of us. We can finally rest." He faded into the light, and Maya woke up. She was in her childhood bedroom, wrapped in the same quilt her grandmother had made 50 years ago. Sunlight was streaming through the window. The clock on the nightstand read 9:47 a.m. She had slept for nearly 10 hours. Maya lay there for a long moment, trying to process what had happened. She couldn't remember the last time she slept more than 3 or 4 hours at a stretch. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept without her rifle in her arms. But last night, she put the rifle in its case. She put the case in the corner of her room. She climbed into bed, pulled the quilt up to her chin, and fallen asleep within minutes. And she'd slept, really, truly slept, with dreams that didn't leave her screaming. She reached for her phone and found 3 missed calls from Rodriguez, 2 text messages from Kim, and an email from Colonel Morrison's office with the subject line, "Commendation Ceremony. Your attendance requested." She ignored all of them. Instead, she got out of bed, pulled on civilian clothes for the first time in months, and went downstairs to have breakfast with her parents. They ate pancakes and bacon and drank coffee on the back porch, watching the morning mist burn off the fields. Her father asked if she wanted to go fishing later. Her mother suggested they drive into town for groceries. Normal things. Civilian things. Things that Maya had almost forgotten existed. She said yes to both. The 14-day leave passed quickly. Maya fished with her father, shopped with her mother, took long walks through the fields and forests of her childhood. She slept, not always well, but more than she had in years. She ate regular meals. She laughed, occasionally, at jokes that weren't funny enough to justify laughter. She began to remember what it felt like to be human. On the 10th day, she drove to Arlington National Cemetery. James Rivera was buried in Section 60, among the other soldiers who had died in Afghanistan and Iraq. His headstone was simple: name, rank, dates of birth and death, the Purple Heart and bronze star symbols engraved beneath. Maya stood before it for a long time, not speaking, just being there, honoring him with her presence. Finally, she knelt and traced her fingers over the engraved letters. "I had a dream about you," she said quietly. "You told me I could rest, that we could both rest." She paused, blinking back tears. "I don't know if that was really you or just my subconscious trying to tell me something, but I want you to know that I heard you. I'm trying." She pulled the wooden box from her pocket, the box with 7 dog tags on red velvet, and opened it. "I've been carrying you with me for 2 years. All of you, everywhere I went, everything I did, you were there. And I think that was right, for a while. I think I needed to carry you. But I also think it's time to let you rest." One by one, she removed the dog tags from the box. She read each name aloud: James Kowalski, Thompson, Williams, Davis, Morrison, Warren, and placed each tag at the base of James's headstone. "You died protecting your soldiers. The best way I can honor that is to keep protecting mine. But I don't have to carry your weight anymore. I don't have to punish myself for surviving when you didn't." She closed the empty box and stood. "Thank you, James, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for pushing me to stay in the Army when I wanted to quit, for being my friend when I needed one most." She saluted the headstone, a crisp, perfect military salute, and held it for a long moment. "Rest easy, soldier. I've got the watch." She walked away without looking back. On the 14th day, Maya reported to Fort Bragg for her next assignment. Colonel Morrison had pulled strings to get her attached to a training unit, where her experience would be used to prepare other soldiers for combat deployments. "You'll be teaching the Chin Protocol," Morrison told her during their brief phone conversation. "Threat assessment, defensive preparation, the mindset required to survive in hostile territory. We've been losing too many soldiers to complacency. You're going to teach them how to stay sharp." Maya realized the perfect assignment. She could use her hypervigilance to protect others without constantly putting herself in danger. She could channel her trauma into something productive, something that might save lives. She could finally stop fighting and start teaching. Her first class was scheduled for Monday morning, 23 soldiers preparing for deployment to Afghanistan. Maya spent the weekend preparing her materials, reviewing her notes, organizing her thoughts. She also spent time with her rifle. The M110 with its 7 engraved names was still her companion. She still slept with it nearby. She still felt anxious when it was out of reach, but she no longer clutched it like a lifeline. She no longer needed it pressed against her body to feel safe. She was learning to trust again, to trust the system, trust her fellow soldiers, trust herself. It was a slow process, and there would be setbacks, but she was making progress. For the first time in 2 years, Maya Chin believed that she might be okay. The commendation ceremony took place at Fort Bragg on a crisp autumn morning. Maya stood at attention before a crowd of soldiers and officers, her dress uniform perfect, her medals gleaming in the sunlight. Colonel Morrison read the citation aloud. "For extraordinary heroism in combat operations against enemy forces at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Afghanistan, on September 23, 2011, Staff Sergeant Chun, serving as a senior sniper attached to intelligence operations, correctly identified and reported enemy reconnaissance activities despite dismissal of her warnings by superior officers. When enemy forces launched a coordinated mortar and ground assault, Staff Sergeant Chun single-handedly defended the northern perimeter, engaging and eliminating 34 enemy combatants, while suppressing mortar positions that threatened the entire base. Her actions, performed at great personal risk and in the face of overwhelming enemy numbers, directly resulted in the survival of 83 American soldiers. Staff Sergeant Chen's extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty reflect great credit upon herself, and are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service. The Distinguished Service Cross was pinned to her chest. Applause filled the parade ground. Maya stood at attention, her eyes fixed forward, her expression calm. Inside, she was thinking about the soldiers she had saved, the soldiers she hadn't been able to save, the long road that had led her to this moment, and the longer road that stretched ahead. After the ceremony, Rodriguez approached her. He'd been transferred to Fort Bragg as well, partly by request, partly because command wanted to keep the Sentinel survivors together. "How does it feel?" he asked, nodding at the medal on her chest. Maya considered the question. "Heavy," she said finally, "but the good kind of heavy. You earned it." "Did I?" She looked out at the soldiers dispersing across the parade ground. "I did my job. I saw a threat. I prepared for it. And when it came, I fought. That's what we're all supposed to do. But most of us don't. Most of us get comfortable, get complacent, assume that someone else is watching our backs." Rodriguez shook his head. "You never assumed that. You never stopped watching. And that's why we're alive." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, which she pressed into Rodriguez's hand. It was a challenge coin, custom made, with the FOB Sentinel emblem on one side and the words Chunwatch on the other. "I had these made for everyone who survived," she said. "A reminder that vigilance isn't paranoia. It's survival." Rodriguez looked at the coin, then at Maya. "You know, when you first showed up at Sentinel, I thought you were crazy. I know. I was wrong. You were the sanest person on that base. The only one who could see clearly because you'd already paid the price for not seeing clearly before. Maybe I was crazy, and I just happened to be right this time." Rodriguez laughed. "Either way, I'll take it." They walked together toward the training barracks, where Maya's first class of students was waiting. 23 soldiers, young and eager and unprepared for the reality of combat. She was going to prepare them. She was going to teach them everything she knew about threat assessment, defensive positioning, and the mindset required to survive in hostile territory. She was going to make sure that none of them ever experienced what she had experienced at FOB Cottier. "Ready?" Rodriguez asked as they reached the door. Maya thought about James Rivera. She thought about the 7 soldiers whose names were engraved on her rifle stock. She thought about the 83 soldiers who had survived FOB Sentinel because she couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop preparing, couldn't stop being afraid. "Ready," she said. She walked into the classroom, and for the first time in years, she didn't bring her rifle. She left it in her quarters, secured in its case. It was still nearby, still accessible, but no longer clutched in her hands. The students looked up as she entered. Some of them had heard stories about her. Some of them looked nervous, uncertain what to expect from the legendary sniper who slept with her weapon. Maya stood at the front of the classroom and met their eyes one by one. "My name is Staff Sergeant Maya Chun," she said. "I have 128 confirmed kills, 2 Silver Stars, and a Distinguished Service Cross. I also have PTSD, chronic hypervigilance, and an inability to relax that my therapist calls functionally maladaptive." The students shifted uncomfortably. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something important. The skills that kept me alive, the obsessive preparation, the constant threat assessment, the refusal to assume that everything is fine, those aren't disorders. They're adaptations. They're what happens when you've seen how quickly everything can go wrong, and you refuse to let it happen again." She picked up a piece of chalk and wrote 2 words on a blackboard. "Chunwatch. Over the next 6 weeks, I'm going to teach you everything I know. How to read terrain for threats. How to fortify positions. How to trust your instincts when everyone around you is telling you that you're paranoid. And most importantly, how to stay alive when the enemy is watching and waiting for you to get comfortable." Maya turned back to face her students. "Are there any questions before we begin?" A hand went up, a young specialist with nervous eyes and a ranger tab on his shoulder. "Staff Sergeant, is it true that you predicted the attack on FOB Sentinel 3 days before it happened?" Maya thought about the ridgeline, the reflections, the photographs that everyone had dismissed as paranoid delusions. "Yes," she said. "It's true. How did you know? How did you see what everyone else missed?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a small, tired, genuine smile. Because I learned the hard way that the price of not seeing is too high to pay. And I made a promise that I would never pay that price again. She turned back to the blackboard and began to write. Outside, the autumn sun was shining. Somewhere, in a cemetery in Virginia, 7 soldiers were finally resting in peace. And in a classroom at Fort Bragg, Staff Sergeant Maya Chand was teaching the next generation how to survive. Maya's story shows us that the soldiers society calls broken are often simply the ones who see most clearly. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Maya's instincts, or would you dismiss her warnings like Captain Holloway? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories of courage under fire are coming. See you in the next one.